actually, that people regard these as very different. Private equity was a new kid on the block, was in some way rather sort of almost sinister. It was a sort of threat to public markets. Increasingly people will see this as just an alternative pool of capital, managed in a slightly different way, that brings slightly different stewardship for companies. And you will see big private equity firms taking shares, taking ownership stakes, strategic stakes in public companies, working alongside public shareholders.
Yeah.
And people say, well, actually, it's a rather healthy thing. They're bringing something different. They're bringing a slightly different approach. They're bringing a different pool of capital. And it's enhancing for public markets.
Yeah, so change in perception.
I think there will be a change of perception. I think that people are getting used to the fact that now the big private equity firms, the really big ones, the KKRs and TPGs and Sinvens and Permiras, they are very big financial institutions today. They're very big players in the market. And just as in the early days they seemed like a threat to the establishment, they're becoming the establishment.
Yes. Yeah.
They might not like to think that way, but they are. They're becoming institutionalised.
Yeah. No, I agree. Actually, could we talk a little bit about the Asda situation? And I suppose I'm very interested in the sort of the people side, and I was conscious that some of the people you brought in were like Richard Baker and Andy Hornby. Could you talk a little bit around what you did at Asda from the people point of view, and how you sort of helped these guys ultimately get on a path to running a FTSE 100?
Well, Asda was a shipwreck, and like behind most financial failures is an organisation failure. So, our belief was people changing meant changing people, and we did change a lot of people. So we were big recruiters of talent, and I set out to find smart people who would be very action-oriented. We couldn't attract the best. See, we couldn't attract the big establishment stars. Nobody who's a director of Tesco would come and join us. So I had to look for people who are younger, smarter, who I could give 2 levels of promotion to. They come to Asda because of the opportunity. And I think as a consequence we brought in a lot of people who were attracted to that type of risk-taking, action-oriented environment, and we could offer them a big advance in their career. And they made a jump to join us. And then, of course, we actually created for them a searing experience. Being at Asda in the early 90s was tough and was fast, and it's because we had a burning platform. So early in their careers they got this searing experience which imprinted itself as a way of working in their minds, and I'd like to think equipped people very well for the future. Of course, today you look around and you say, oh well, look, they're all successful, they're running HBOS or Richard Baker's case Boots, or Alan Leighton was Royal Mail. Actually, at the time, some of them didn't work out, and you don't hear about those ones. Right. But part of our system is very, very performance-driven. So the good guys came through. Yeah.
And how did you make it so performance-driven? What did you do?
Well, we just had very high expectations of people. There was a culture of action. People were expected to deliver traction, deliver outcomes, to work on the front line. It was all part of the Asda culture we're building, colleague-based culture, single status, fast, frontline driven. You work with the stores, work with the customers, and I think that's nowadays much more management orthodoxy. It wasn't then.
Yes.
And but it gave people a sort of framework, an attitude to management, an attitude to people, which they carried with them later in life.
Okay. So as part of these interviews, we have interviewed 3/4 of the FTSE 100, and my takeaway is that this is still maybe half of them are more like conventional managers, without that sort of pace and risk appetite. And I just wonder that you went into the Asda because you had to. There's a necessity of the situation. But now going forward, do you think it is better to go for that sort of younger generation to create that sort of? Do you think that's a better way of actually leading a business anyway?
I think everybody has their own sort of philosophical attitude to business, and I have mine. And I believe that today's contemporary businesses are all about businesses that create a highly motivational, highly disciplined, fast-moving type of organisation. And to do that, you need people who fit with that. And I absolutely think that if you want to change a culture, you've got to change the people. Yeah. I think working with people, sending them on training programs, trying to get them to change when they come back and sit behind the same desk with the same people every day is the slow road. And if you turn around, you can't afford the slow road. So I absolutely think that's right. I don't think that there is one recipe for management. And I don't think my formula will work in say, a mining company or a railway company. I don't know whether it will or not.
Yeah.
I think it's always important. Management has to be about humility. We don't have a secret formula.
Yeah.
We have an approach. It works for some companies at some points in time, and you've got to learn from that. If you move into a different company, you've got to listen to that company, cut with the grain, understand that culture and how you're going to change it.
Yeah, so it's absolutely situational. Yeah, and I think a lot of the companies are struggling shifting from a sort of command and control and quite hierarchical businesses towards, I think they're trying to become more like cells, fast-moving, dynamic.
Well, you see, I think there's an enticing delusion in there,
right?
Which is that companies aren't command and control. What's changed is that the age of deference is over. People don't assume they should do what they're asked to do just because they're asked to do it by a senior manager. They don't, people don't recognise seniority anymore. So authority has to be legitimised. Management has to have a reason. There has to be a set of values, a belief in what we're doing. People want to come to work, not just to earn a daily crust, but to fulfil themselves. So organisations have to have values, a culture, a set of beliefs which legitimise the management. But not to have command and control is death. We're in a fast-moving, globally competitive world where, if I'm running Asda, I've got 100,000 people. I've got to be able to turn on a sixpence overnight. I can't sort of wait through some democratic process while we decide whether we're going to react to Tesco or not. It's got to be like that. So command and control has to be there, but to make command and control work, you've got to have a motivational culture where everybody feels we're doing a great thing here, and if the boss wants to do this, we have an Asda way of doing it. There's a set of habits which enable us to do it and to move very, very fast, and we'll all commit to it, and we'll all do it the same way, and we'll all do it now.
Yeah. Okay, now I understand. From our conversations before, you seem to have a sort of a systems view of how a company works. You could sort of look above it and see how it all sort of pulled together. And you seem to be able to sort of make very quick changes, as you say, on a sixpence. But some of the people that I've spoken to saw you as somebody who was always with the customer and lead by the front, but didn't necessarily see you as somebody who was the softer side of you, or the warmer side of you as a CEO. But actually then afterwards, a number of people like Richard talked to me about how you were always there for them and you helped them. Could you just... is that a fair perception, or
I think that I'm not a great believer in the chief executive as a charismatic personality. I mean, some people love the big stage, and that could be an advantage. There's a moment for that. I think the risk is today when you survey, big public companies, is some chief executives look like politicians. They look as if the media is as important to them as the company. In fact, they end up getting themselves all over the company. And I think that's to be avoided, because for people beneath them, it's diminishing.
Yeah.
And, the great leaders, in a way, are the leaders who are not remembered. They create great companies, but everybody else thinks that they were responsible for what was achieved. People in the company are responsible for what was achieved.
Yeah.
And I think you have to balance this thing about being everybody's friend in the company, being on the stage and a sort of joker, sparkling personality, to balance the moments when that's needed, the moments when the general has to stand up and say, guys, we're going to slaughter the enemy, we're going to take that hill. There are moments like that, but most of management today is about enabling other people to become successful, enabling them being effective in getting them to buy into what you're trying to do. And doing that means not getting yourself over them. It means making them greater people. Yeah.
And what advice would you have to people who are aspiring to be CEOs in the future, in terms of those at the early stages of their career?
Well, I think that firstly, chief executive isn't for everybody. It's a lonely job. It's a lonely, tough job, and there are many great jobs in business that are not being chief executive, so. I think there's a danger in this country. We tend to think managements are hierarchies, and they're not really.